Hello, everyone. We'll give people just a couple minutes.
Oh, I like the music, Rachel.
Oh, it's all Ryan. It's all Ryan.
That sounds like it's non-copyrighted.
It is not copyrighted. That's very much elevator music.
I'll give everybody just one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, we'll cut the music and get started. Welcome to our manufacturing learning series, Mastering Trade Shows with Lake One. We're happy to have everybody here. I'm Rachel Seco, the VP of Client Delivery at Lake One, and now I'll let the panel introduce themselves. Ladies first, Lauren, so we can start with you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lauren Bittes. I work at Purist. We are a plant-based ingredient manufacturer specializing in pea protein, so B2B business selling into CPG brands.
Thank you. Pat?
Okay, I'm Pat Estenson. I'm a sales manager at American Polywater Corporation. We are a chemical manufacturer that has kind of a niche market space in the electrical and telecommunications markets.
Thanks, Pat. And then you may or may not already know Ryan, but I'll let
Hey
you.
everybody, I'm Ryan Root. I'm the founder and CEO of Lake One. We are a HubSpot Solutions partner, and apparently I'm also the DJ extraordinaire for these Restream events. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. All right, so we will kick it off. We'll talk a little bit about trade show strategy, and then we'll kind of move into the order of operations for going to a trade show. We'll talk about pre-show, during show, and post, and then, of course, we'll open it to the group for questions. So don't be shy. If you have any comments, questions, please feel free to add them to the chat, and we'll answer them as they come. All right, so in the theme of trade show strategy, how do you select the right trade shows to participate in, and what criteria do you use? Lauren, we can start with you.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a couple different approaches to trade shows in the food world, at least. So there's shows that you can walk. There are shows where you can have a little tabletop, and then there are shows where you really want to do an exhibit, like a big exhibit. We typically try and see where our customer footprint is. So where is the biggest bang for our buck? So an example would be in Q4. It's contracting season going into next year. So we'll want to make sure that the trade shows that we go to are strategic in the sense where we have FaceTime with those customers and we're able to grab those contracts over the line. Or in another world is how do we find customers that fit our portfolio really well? So looking to see those attendees, and then does it make sense to send one salesperson to walk the floor and really solicit, or do we want to attract people to try our samples? And so that's kind of the guardrails we give ourselves within our world.
Awesome, thanks. Pat, how about you?
Well, I kind of look at what types. I mean, are they a national show? Then I would weigh that with more regional type shows that would maybe benefit me in particular versus the entire company. And the conferences also, where you may have a small tabletop or a small display, and for the most part, it depends kind of on our market penetration. So there might be some shows where we are very well known in that industry or in that market. And so we have to be there or be conspicuously absent. Or it could be a particular segment of our market that we want to bolster our position and get our name out there bigger. So those all kind of play into what we're, our strategy of choosing a show, as well as what type of people are at the show. So is this a particular show that's more suited, that's going to be walked by purchasing agents? Or is this going to be a show that's more attended by engineers and operations people who might be more specifiers of our products as opposed to just reading a product code off a requisition and ordering it. So there's a lot of different things that go into deciding which show, is going to work for us.
Okay, so given that, I feel like there's always this question, especially with our customers, and it's, do you not? Do you sponsor? Do you not? Do you kind of go rogue and host a private event? How do you decide what's the best route? I'm sure it's dependent on show, but what's kind of your go-to, or what factors lead into that decision?
Well, we basically exhibit at every show we go to from on the sales side. So again, I'm a sales guy. Our purchasing people for our manufacturing facility, they are the people walking the show. I wish I could do that sometimes, just show up and walk the show and leave, but I'm there setting up the booth, tearing it down, and that kind of thing. So we're always exhibiting. And sometimes we'll sponsor something like more of a conference style. We might sponsor a learning session or a lunch, that type of thing. And that's really just if we maybe want to focus on some new type of product we have to a group that we're familiar with.
Awesome. Thanks.
We never go rogue, because for the most part, we're returning to about the same shows over and over. So going rogue could kind of put us down the list there.
Okay, good to know. How about you, Lauren?
I would say it's echoing kind of Pat's sentiment. There are a couple shows that are critical to our cadence. So, and a good example is here in the tail end of the year, we have one big show where we know all our customers are going to be, and that's critical for contracting season. However, I would say we sometimes are on the rogue side. So food shows pop up here and there. So we primarily serve the plant-based food industry. So Plant-Based World was a new trade show that came on the market not that long ago. And we were on the fence. Do we exhibit? Do we not exhibit? And we're constantly trialing what makes sense for our business. We're also a fairly lean team. So being a lean team makes it a little bit more complicated. So how can we divide and conquer in a meaningful way? I wish we had a trade show coordinator that could map it all out. Unfortunately, it's more of a team collaborative effort, and people will say, oh, well, this is coming up. I really think that we should have a presence there. And sometimes a little bit of a scramble to the finish line to make sure that we are polished and ready for a show. For example, there's like a thought leadership type trade show that's coming up next month, and we decided yesterday that we were going to attend.
Okay.
So that was a little stressful, but we are rallying to put together a tabletop, so it's not nearly as critical as that like really big show that we have at the tail end of the year. And that tabletop, we're going to showcase samples, because food is a little bit more tricky in the sense where people have to try your product to really understand why they should purchase it from you. So similar to Pat's comment around your different buyers, there's a show that we used to exhibit at, and it was primarily food scientists, and they are stakeholders in that sales process. But in the food industry, there's like multiple stakeholders, and if you don't balance them all equally, it takes one person to kill a deal. So so instead of exhibiting at IFT, we attend that show instead, and spend more time talking to the food scientists. And we have like more backpacks and don't necessarily tried and true of an exhibit where we host meetings. We're just trying to get people to try our product, like just try it.
Yeah.
And then let's follow up and have a meeting. Where Supply Side West is more of we want to meet with you, come to us. We want to make sure that we're lockstep going into the new year. We want to hear about your new products. We want to hear how sales are going and what your demand's going to look like for the upcoming year. So
I've got a follow-up question on that.
Yeah.
For you, Pat, too, because you guys both kind of defined a couple of different scenarios where, depending on the type of show, who's going to be in attendance, I feel like there's probably different ways in which you measure ROI, or you set a KPI of what you're trying to accomplish out of it. I mean, I think we've all been in trade shows where it's like, hey, throw a business card in a fishbowl, and it's like, that's not the greatest experience in the world for anybody. But like, how do you think about setting KPIs for a trade show? You kind of started to say that a little bit there with the food scientists. Like, walk us through a little bit more deeper with some of that thinking of like where you're at in the season, really trying to be strategic about it. Because I think sometimes trade shows, they take a huge part of the marketing and sales budget, and sometimes we find oftentimes organizations struggle to really set meaningful KPIs around it where they align with what can actually be accomplished at the event.
Yeah, I would say it's critical to understand your customers' buying cycle. And so in the food industry, for example, it depends on their fiscal year, but a lot of them they get their budget fresh in Q1. And then we have a really critical trade show right there in March where people are launching new products and they want to spend money. They're trying to spend money. And that KPI is more about how do we get as many leads as humanly possible, and let's get the conversation going in Q1 so we can sell, 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 sell. Q2, Q3, things start to like slow down a bit. I would say summer months is like not selling season, specifically for the food industry or our particular plant-based sector. People they're working on their product launches. They're in the process of comparing, and that's why that middle of the summer IFT show was no longer an exhibitor type show for us. We're reconsidering for next year, but it's not really selling. It's more of touching base. How are your projects going?
Yeah.
Maybe you should introduce a new ingredient, but it's not nearly as like hot to trot as it is in the forefront of the year. And then I've said this a couple times now, but like coming to Q4, so apologies for repeating myself, that's all contracting season. So our KPIs are revolving around customer meetings. How can we make sure that this stays on track? Is something off track? And so it evolves throughout the year. I have a unique lens and trade shows whenever I attend. I think you could do business with as many people as humanly possible. So how can we figure out ways to work together or be a connector and a thought leader in this space where we're like, oh, I hear you. Your sunflower protein, not something we dabble in, but we know this one customer who's formulating, and there's always ways to partner with other B2B businesses, with B2C businesses across the way. So I'm a stickler on the lead capture and making sure we're labeling them correctly and making sure that we have the correct follow-up, because that's critical. And there's always, whether it's biz dev or tried and true sales, there's lots of people in between. I talked a lot, Pat. I'm sorry.
Unintended with across the way.
Yeah.
Right? Across the way.
Yeah, that's clever.
Let me break that down. I kind of forgot the question. No, I mean, the way we would strategize would be if it's a large national show. Again, we have, that might be more attended by purchasing agents. So there it would be a lot about numbers and lead generation, and the back end follow up might be a little less personal, might be more based on, we are taking notes with our lead capture system, and might be specific only in the types of products they were looking at, but the email might be a little more automated from our CRM. Whereas a smaller, more conference or more regional show where we can have a meaningful conversations with engineers or specifier type people, those might be more a phone call type of follow-up, or at least a pointed personal email or something to get the ball rolling on, hopefully what is a project. We are less focused on time of year dictating our KPIs. We're in the construction world, so there's not a lot of trade shows that are happening, like from May, June through August, but September to April is that they're throughout that time period. Construction doesn't really stop because they're always planning and things are going on. So for us, the KPI would really be based on the type of show. If you go to that show, it's expensive. We want a lot of leads coming out of it. This show is smaller, more regional, but it's very focused. So the leads tend to be of higher quality.
Awesome. So this is kind of a great segue into pre-show and how you prep for a show. And we actually had a question. So beyond exhibit logistics, how do you prepare for a show? And do you reach out and set up meetings at the show, reach out in cold advance and promote on social? What are some of the things that you do?
Well, we definitely, promote on social. And, the way our business model works is we are contracted with a number and then sometimes long relationships with independent sales rep firms throughout the country. So we rely on them being the feet on the street in the market to have these tight relationships. So we also communicate with the reps, hey, which of our customers are going to be at this show or prospects? Can we set up where you at least you go to the show and bring them to the booth, or at least set up something for me to meet them. So a lot of it is still, that's kind of old fashioned still, but using social media is definitely something we do, as well as we might send out something to our CRM database, HubSpot, through HubSpot. But to me, other parts of preparing for the show aren't just the marketing. Big part of the show is maybe, and this evolves maybe over time, but developing your display and the samples you show and the way you show them. For instance, I can walk by some trade show booths and they've got a backdrop and they've got a tablecloth, but on their table is just a bunch of marketing handout flyers that I could have found on their website, and they're sitting at a chair. Versus maybe picking up some product displays and having a counter height table that I'm standing at and being a little more inviting, or having a type of booth that is open and invites them into the booth to look at products on display. I think a lot of that pre-planning stuff, so that when you get there you have everything you need. I think that's, and the shipping and logistics. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people, their booth didn't show up because somebody didn't get something straight. So
Right? Yeah.
there's so many parts to it that it's kind of crazy.
I want to double tap on the way that you talk about the booth layout, Pat, because whether it's manufacturing, I mean, honestly, this applies to any industry. I think this is just a trade show 101. Like, do not do this, whatever industry you're in, do not put up that counter height table with all of your brochures and sit behind it and expect people to just come over and start talking to you. I heard someone reference, like, the best strategy you can do if you don't have, one of the big fancy $50,000 booths that like the large competitors have, and all you have is what they give you, which is usually some crappy table with a tablecloth. Go into the booth, push the table to the back, and stand in the middle of your booth and be open and welcoming to everybody. And I see you nodding profusely, Lauren. So I'm sure you agree, and you've been in these situations where it's like, wow, that person does not look engaging and friendly. So talk to me a little bit about what that experience is like for you guys too, as you're prepping and preparing for shows.
Oh my goodness, you're speaking my love language, Ryan. My biggest pet peeve is when I see my team behind the table. Get up and out. Spent money to be here. I think pre-show prep is critical, both from an outward perspective in terms of communication. It takes 7 touch points before someone even remembers something. So whether it's social, email, your salespeople are reaching out, what are other platforms you can announce that you're going to be in attendance, and be very clear as to what you're showcasing so people understand what they can go to you for. We had a really hard time because our branding can be a little confusing. When you go to our website, you can think that we're a consumer facing brand, and it doesn't say like outrightly like we sell pea protein.
Yeah.
So I changed our header to disruptive pea protein, and the amount of people that stopped and asked us like, what's so disruptive about your pea protein, was amazing. And so be as direct and concise as possible in your pre-show planning. And then I also think for your internal teams, it's really critical to do trainings, because especially for more junior members who might be going to their first trade show or haven't been to as many, or maybe went as a student, they need some hand holding. They need to be told, do not sit down. I do not want to see you sit down. You need to engage people walking by. We're here to sell. And there's some trainings that we do internally to prepare for that, whether it's a product training, how to engage with customers, what questions you can and can't ask, what people might ask you that you cannot share. So being crystal clear, my saying internally is clarity is kindness, guys. Remember, clarity is kindness. Be as clear and concise as possible. So that's kind of my perspective.
Some of the things too that we've seen really effective in advance of a show for preparation is seeing what's available from a digital perspective. The thing that I always love to look at when we have a client talking about a show is looking at what the search volume is ahead of the time. And the fun little secret, and this is the turn the volume up, and like if you don't walk away with anything other than this one little tidbit, this is a good one. Is everybody is usually searching for the conference name, but nobody's ever advertising on it. So ahead of the time, everybody's always searching for it, looking to see who the speakers are, looking to see who the exhibitors are, looking to see who the hotels are. It's a great time to run really affordable advertising campaigns to drive traffic to whatever it is you're going to be doing at the show. And you can usually run a search campaign with very, very small dollars spend. And if it's a giveaway, if you're speaking at a keynote or whatever it is that you're doing, it's a really easy way to drive some traffic ahead of that conference.
That's a great idea. I mean, we'll do advertising on the website of the trade show.
Yep.
Or within their digital model, because the large national trade shows usually have some sort of model where you can advertise with them. Leading up to the show, it's obviously going to be digital. You can even have a print ad on the handout that's at the front door of the trade show, and it can be effective as well. I mean, I've seen plenty of times people walk up to our booth and have the show
in their hand. Yeah.
And, that's what drove them there. So, all of that plays in.
We've also done pre-show, and it's not always available, but one of the things that we love to recommend and we've seen our customers do is, depending on if you're exhibiting, sponsoring, sometimes even just for attending the conference, you can get either a company list, sometimes you can get email, and you can prospect, plan your list ahead of time. Who is it that you want to meet there? Whether it's you go to LinkedIn and you're searching for the contacts at the company and you're doing pre-outreach. There's ways to automate the LinkedIn connection at scale and do other things, but it kind of comes back to the basics of who's going to the conference that in your ecosystem and who do you want to connect with, and doing some of that legwork. Budget depending, we can always help expedite that and broaden the reach, but I definitely say just old-fashioned prospecting according to the list and seeing who's there.
And sometimes trade shows will have apps that you can connect with the attendees ahead of time, which we've had a lot of success with too.
I'm a huge fan of those. Although last year at Inbound, and I love you, HubSpot, but I'm sorry I have to point this one out because it was a little weird. So it was the first Inbound after COVID, and they had these little buttons on their badges, and you had to tap each other, and they were all dangling from a lanyard. So you had to click it and then lean forward to a complete stranger and tap it. It was very awkward because you were just coming out of this space where I can't be near you. I have to elbow tap you, and then all of a sudden it's oh hey, here's my contact information. Let me get right into your personal space.
That's funny.
Okay, so
Rachel's I have nothing after that.
I have not. I was there. It was a little odd. I gotta admit. I agree, Ryan. One more thing on pre-show before we move to during, only because I think booking meetings are so important, because your boss wants to know, everybody wants to know, what does your schedule look like before you go to the show? What's your take on incentives for booking a meeting ahead of time? Do you like it? Do you not? What's your take?
I think it's certain shows it's appropriate and it's expected. Okay. Some shows it's really more of a booth thing the whole time. But one thing I can definitely thing that's bit me before was, and actually, again, Ryan, HubSpot. Love HubSpot, but there's an issue here. When I'm using the scheduler, maybe we've got a meeting room that we're using as a resource and we're sharing it, and we're trying to schedule meetings. And the time zone thing is very important for everybody to understand how that works. If I'm booking meetings for a meeting room in Las Vegas, but somebody from New York City is trying to use my scheduler to do it, the time zones don't match, and it creates confusion. So some of that stuff is important, is to understand the time zones. And the other thing I find is people start when it is a conference or an event or a trade show that is appropriate for meetings. It seems like it's getting earlier and earlier every year, almost ridiculously early, that you need to get up there and schedule where people's calendar cleans up or fills up real quick. I'm now booking meetings. A bunch of us are for a conference that's in February.
Oh
wow!
So it's a little out of hand.
Yeah, I think incentives for the right audience could work. So for food companies in particular, we typically showcase samples, and that is not necessarily like an incentive, but a reason to come and try the product. And we always try to make it, innovative and come try it and we'll send you samples. If I were to put so Purus not only manufactures pea protein, but we also work with a network of about 400 farmers who grow our peas. We buy them back. Those shows in particular are very incentive heavy in the sense where you need something to draw people to the booth. So we'll do, and that's more at like a farm fest that happens in like south of the cities here in Minnesota. We would do a tabletop and we'll raffle off a Yeti cooler if you come and stop at our booth. And not all the leads are great, but for that particular audience of farmers, it works really well because it drives the traffic you need and you're able to educate. In a food ingredient show, not so much. You really just need to showcase the actual sample and talk about the food technology behind it. It also is dependent on if you're talking to a procurement person or a food scientist or a brand manager, because all of those talking points are so different. So it ranges. I'd say the audience is really, really critical in understanding whether you need incentives or not.
Along that line, with like a Yeti cooler giveaway or something like that, I've seen, giveaways work in a couple different ways. I've seen long lines at booths because of a free T-shirt of a popular brand of work clothing, where people are just standing in this long line to get a T-shirt, and then they I don't think the company really gained much other than a name in a database. But I've also seen the not just a T-shirt, but say a Yeti cooler or something big and more substantial, and a smaller company, but they're giving away this big prize, and the registration for the drawing is a digital. So they've set up a digital way that people can sign up, and they capture the information, all the information right away, and then they're entered into the drawing. And people have to give you the real email because that's how they would contact you after the show. So that's there's some unique things that are being done with that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So while you're at the show, what is your approach to networking and relationship building? Like, how are you making those connections with other exhibitors, attendees, influencers at the show?
I think for me, a lot of it's old school. It's kind of like you said, is go through the list, know who I want to meet. And then I leave the booth while somebody else is there, and I just take a stack of business cards and go stick up my hand and shake my hand and introduce myself. After that, it could be a cocktail party that's associated with the trade show, that type of thing, where people are expecting to be approached. These are good times to casually mention, next time I'm in your city, let's have a lunch and learn with your team or something like that. And it really can warm things up real quick when you're trying to, get together a focused group of the rest of their team down the road. And of course, linking in with everybody you meet and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think lead generation for the longest time, this is going to sound so old school. For the longest time, we would have a book that we had for the trade show and we would label it and it'd be like Supply Side West 2018. And we'd have stapler and the requirement was to staple the business card and write information. And that made me want to claw my eyes out, because to sit down after the show and then go through each lead and allocate them, who's going to follow up? No, absolutely not. The biggest game changer was when we started leveraging those lead capture tools at the show, and people were like, oh, those are expensive. Yeah, but the amount of time that it saves post-show is remarkable. And, the requirement is when you scan someone's badge, you put the notes in there, even if you're traveling. And what we've done is we enabled it on each person's individual phone, so they capture it throughout the show, whether they're at a cocktail party or they're at someone else's booth or they're working our booth. Get all that information in there because it makes it easy to export, download, figure out how to clean it up before importing it to HubSpot, assign to the right contacts, and get that post-show follow-up going. Also critical to understand your audience. Granted, always much better said than actually doing the actual tasks. It takes discipline and accountability to keep the team on track through that process. You really need a core leader who can bring that from start to finish. But that's how I like to tackle leads.
I love that. I love the idea of finding some way to and I love that you started with the book. of the binder book, because I think that's where a lot of organizations still are. I mean, I think they're still at either here's a stack of business cards and I go back to my hotel room and I've written something on the back of it and I type it in or whatever it is. But I love that you told the story of the migration to a lead capture, because I think what it does two things. Yes, it saves your team a ton of time, but it also gives you an opportunity to make an impression with that lead that you just connected with by automating a message to them right away that says, hey, thanks, it was great to meet you, whatever it was, and to start to set the tone for what they're going to experience from you after the show, so that you can stand out and not just be another sea of sameness of like, hey, thanks for stopping by our booth and why did you want to buy our weight? Like, because there's so much of that noise. And it leads me to my next question, because we've all been to trade shows and we all know how exhausting they are and how much our brains are just like sap afterwards. So it's really important that you carve out a space in the brain of the lead to be able to actually start a real sales conversation after. My question to you guys is unrelated to all of that, but specifically, how do you measure, like, how do you balance your stamina through, let's say, a multi-day event? Because I think we've all had these moments where it's like, okay, it's 5 solid days and evenings, let's go. Like, because that's hard, especially when you're on from sometimes like 10 until 10 every single day. Like, how do you approach that? And not everybody is like 100% extroverted. Like, we all need time to recharge. So I'm just curious, like, how do you personally handle that?
Well, I've been exhibiting at trade shows for 25 plus years, and I've gotten older, 25 years older, in fact. And I've learned a few things. I no longer can stay up and party as late at night, which is a big thing during trade shows.
Yeah.
So sleep is a really important thing, I think, throughout the show. A better diet. I mean, all those healthy lifestyle choices are really important at a trade show if you're trying to put together multi-day things, and maybe spend a little extra money to get the extra padding in the trade show booth and extra money for better shoes. And those types of things really help you with that whole stamina issue.
Yeah, I would echo Pat's sentiment. You definitely need comfy sneakers. I always cringe when I see those very extravagant shoes that look uncomfortable. And then outside of just being highly caffeinated, I personally really enjoy working out. So I always try to block off time in my morning so that if the hotel has a gym, I can have some time to myself. If it doesn't, I used to leverage this tool called ClassPass where I would do classes in different cities. So that's how I would take time for myself, but that's not always for everybody. I try to always bake in some time, after the show. I'm a stickler. I want to go back to the hotel room. I need at least 30 minutes or an hour to myself where I can refreshen up and get ready for my sprint of dinners. So I think blocking off that personal time and just being really disciplined about it. Like, I'll tell my team, like, I got to go back to the hotel. I'm sorry. I'm game over. Like, I can't do like a happy hour right after this. I need to go back to the hotel. I need to drop my stuff off, put some more deodorant on, and I'll meet you. I'll meet you at the happy hour.
Awesome.
And lots of bottles of water in the booth.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And carrots. I love carrots. I always have like my little veggie pack that I carry, but that goes back to Pat's point.
That's a secret right there. Carrot pack.
Awesome. Okay, so we have just 15 more minutes left. We'll open it up as we have been to any Q&A. Thanks for the question earlier. Drop them in if you have them. But one of the things, and maybe this will lead to a little anecdote, what are common mistakes to avoid? They can be mistakes that you've made pre-show, in your previous trade show experience, or what are some mistakes to avoid?
Well, it kind of falls along what we just talked about, but you just can't be lazy in the booth. You've spent a lot of money, a lot of resources, time to everything that led to that moment of being in that trade show.
Mm-hmm.
You don't squander it by sitting lazily in a booth. I mean, paste that smile on and hold it as long as you can. And you've got to do something to engage people to come and hear what you are there to stay. So that I think that the just don't be lazy in general covers a lot of those things.
I also think some of the mistakes that people tend to make are there's like a spectrum. So in terms of trade show preparation, you can overthink every little piece and want to make all this custom marketing and all this custom stuff. When at the end of the day, what I saw the most success was when I changed the headline to disruptive pea protein.
Mhm.
Didn't need to overthink it. On the other side of the spectrum, you also don't want to come underprepared. So I think when it comes to preparing your marketing material, have other stakeholders review it. Make sure that you're checking your boxes, you're dotting your I's, you're crossing your T's, you don't have silly misspellings that don't make you look polished. Because if you don't look polished, no one will take you seriously. That's just like I'm a stickler on polish. So you need to find your kind of middle ground in between. Don't overthink it, but also don't half-ass it and do it the lazy way, like Pat said. You really need to get more, and people, your team will buy into stuff that they weigh in. So the earlier and more often you get them involved in the process, they feel like they're a part of it and will own it and bring it to the show. So really finding your middle ground, I think, is critical in having a successful show.
Well, one last thing that kind of I think you reminded me of is the idea that trade shows, you need to have experienced personnel in the booth. It's a great way for new people to learn about your market and learn about the company that they just started working for and gain some experience. But if they're not hearing experienced people either explaining the products and the markets to customers, or if you just don't have the booth staffed with an experienced person who knows the answer, it's a waste of your whole resource of being there. So I think it's important that the experienced people are available.
Yeah, I would agree. And even stacking it. So if you have like a niche industry where you need a technical expert, maybe a brand expert, I don't know what the spectrum is. Like, for example, for food industry, we need a food scientist at the booth at all times. At all times. I cannot speak science. I know enough to be dangerous, but the right question puts me over the edge and I need to pull someone aside. But also I understand that the food scientist might not be able to predict market trends as well as maybe a marketer like myself can. And so I'm able to lean in that expertise and making sure that your booth is staffed and stacked appropriately depending on your audience of buyers.
Makes sense.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody. And I'll close with one. If you have anything to add, you definitely can. But was there something that we didn't ask that you wish we did?
From me?
Yeah, anybody.
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of important things that
Awesome.
they might be basic, but they're pretty critical for having a successful trade show.
Yeah, I would say we hit all the main points. Preparation is key. You're only going to be as successful as your prep work is going to be. You need to make sure that you're hustling while you're there and making the juice worth the squeeze. And last but not least, job's not done when you leave the show. There's the sales cycle, at least in a B2B market, is a long sales cycle. So how do you keep that relationship going and carry on? Are there short wins and are there long wins? So a trade show isn't just that week or weekend that you're there. It's really the month and the month after and so on and so forth. It's what you make of it.
So I have some questions about that on the follow-up side of it. So after the show, what are kind of your standard go-to, some of the key things? I mean, you've gotten some of these leads. Rachel has a saying here that she likes to tell people when she's working with them, with our clients, about their trade shows. Not everybody in your CRM cares. So, what's your approach? Like, how do you approach follow-up after the show?
Well, I think the CRM part is interesting because to me, if I've scanned their badge and there's notes in there, that follow up is crucial. So getting those leads that have been scanned and are on everybody's scanners, gather them all together, whatever that list is, qualify them, and then loading them into HubSpot is kind of number one. And then again, breaking down the type of follow-up. If it's a kind that deserves a very personal email, then that's what you do. If it's a kind that you got to pick up the phone and call this person, you do that. I mean, it's breaking down the follow-up and following and actually doing it, because it's all for naught if you don't follow up, because they're not going to remember your name or your brand even, probably, if just from that day that they walk by for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think the follow-ups are going to be critical on the work that you put in during the show. So the better notes that you take, the more reminders you put, however it works for you is critical, because the way that we look at post-show activities is how do we get samples in people's hands? But to Ryan's point earlier, not everyone wants a sample. Your person who's trying to sell you processing aids doesn't want to sample your product. They just want to sell you processing aids. So finding that balance of who are people that we're going to collaborate with in a different lens, who are the people that need samples, who are the people that are like that. Yeah, just dividing and conquering in an appropriate way, and making sure, automating that lead capture during the show is a game changer in the sense where you're able to do it more quickly and effectively than you would be able to if you have an old school stapled notebook where you have to go page by page and it's painful.
I hope we kept that notebook just for posterity's sake, but
We have a couple old ones that I keep as
a reminder of
like
the pain.
reminders of the
Yeah.
pain, as like I never want to do that again.
Never, yeah. So you both kind of referenced CRM, the importance of the technology component throughout all of this. In the follow-up, I think we see, obviously, we get the benefit of seeing a lot of clients doing a lot of different things, and there's a lot of schools of thought around follow-up, and unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of school of thoughts of like just dump them into a nurture sequence and everybody gets the same thing. You both kind of highlighted the importance of personalization, of tailoring the outreach based on what you learned at the show. So to the extent that you can you share kind of any like strategies that you guys use in your organizations of how you balance sales and marketing collaboration on that? Because of course there's going to be, a glut of these contacts you're going to get that kind of fit into the they're probably not ready yet and they probably can go into kind of some marketing nurture work, but then here's this group of people that we have really copious notes about, are really good. Like, how do you strike that balance and figure out and work together to really make a meaningful impact after the show?
I think from like our experience, sorry, Pat, I wasn't sure if you were going to talk yet. I was
I got to think this one. I got to think on this.
I think you can't be afraid to trial and error. Like a good example is this year, for the first time, we trialed something new. We were going to have these custom emails come from all the salespeople's emails that they were assigned these contacts. Personally didn't vet it as well as I probably should have. So we had our CEO emailing all the contacts that he's been assigned to in HubSpot that he's going to be at this trade show in this like super desperate attempt. And it was so bad.
Oh, no.
But we tried it and we gave it a shot. And he said, Lauren, I appreciate you giving a good shot. It facilitated some really good conversations. However, there was some other stuff that was super cringy. And so just being willing to just give things a try and see if it's going to work and stick is half the battle. And then taking those learnings, and I think that's a super powerful tool, but how do we optimize it in a way that we're limiting the pool, we're vetting the list that we're sending it to? I think that's a very tedious and hard task to do, but how do we do that? We've done the broad nurture campaign and our conversions weren't super great. So I think it's trialing and finding the niches that work and then shedding the stuff that doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of trial and error.
I appreciate that you shared the failure, because I feel like too often nobody shares the failures and everybody has like this perspective that like all we see is the successes and we never see like, here's the laundry list of failures below it and then otherwise, we see like there's no successes and no failures. And it's like, it's either one or the other. And it's like, you have to fail to have the success. So
it's so true. And you're going to fail trying something new. You can think that you're not, but maybe you won't. And I commend you for it. Wow, teach me your ways. But most people don't.
If you're listening, please chat in and I'd like to
follow up. You should be on this webinar, not me. If you have never had any failures, I'd like to hear from you.
Exactly.
I think for us, it's a little bit of a learning experience as well, and more of it is building on it. So we, I don't know, Rachel, help me out. We've been using HubSpot for 4 or 5 years now.
Since the dawn of time, Pat.
At the same time, and I mean that database continually. We still get the person who administers our HubSpot is still sending out projects for a number of us to clean up contacts and things like that to better categorize. So we are sending them a proper follow-up. But at the same time, all this time we've been building our marketing group is it's content marketing. We're very focused on content. And so now it's going to be matching up all of those identifiers in HubSpot to the type of content that we have or are building. And that's going to be pretty critical, I think, in the follow-up going forward. But we're just stepping into that.
Yeah, your team is very focused on data segmentation, which is great. So you know who the contact is, where they are, what they fall under, what type. And I think that putting in that legwork on the front end, like you're saying, does a lot for the campaigns. And then you know who's in your database, and you're able to get the right message to the right contacts at the right time. One thing that I want to add to that we've seen some success with is making sure that reach, unless it's personalized because you're following up on a specific conversation, that's one thing. But if you are just trying a mass or an automated kind of follow-up, it's making sure that you're adding value right away in that initial reach. So whether it's you're giving your 3 key takeaways from the show, or like 3 insights that you've had, or you're inviting them to like a lunch and learn, Pat, that you're doing online, or a web or another webinar or LinkedIn Live, but just so that it's not like, I think Ryan said this earlier, that you're not like, hey, want another meeting after you just got back from traveling and you're swamped, do you want to book another meeting with me? It's just that value add to get the conversation going. And then what's great is with HubSpot as a CRM in particular, you can then gauge interest and participation and then move them to kind of that next phase if they bite on that initial outreach. So all good things. Okay, team. Well, I think that's a wrap. For those of you who are attending, if you want to learn more about our upcoming series or watch past shows on demand, you can scan the QR code in the top of the screen there.
Pat and Lauren, thanks so
Lauren.
much.
Yeah, thanks for the time,
Thank
team.
you.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a great day, everyone.